names because their names hold meaning and memory. We call their names because they are still missed. We call their names because they are still loved, and we call their names because they are still remembered. We are grateful this morning for the resilience that resides in the people of this great state. And we came in a spirit of thanksgiving for the families of our 6 heroes, for the first responders, for every responder, for this administration, and for those who worked tirelessly to do in 11 weeks what they said would take 11 months. And we say, thank you. You made us believe in the power of the one that is able to make the impossible possible. For our esteemed Governor Wes Moore, who led the way with tenacity, and Lieutenant Governor Aruna K. Miller for standing in the gap, thank you. We have come to give thanks for every deed, seen and unseen, every kind word and listening ear, known and unknown, for every human and every holy act of grace that has brought us safe thus far, and that same grace will lead us on. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Paul Wiedefeld.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this somber morning. We are here to commemorate the devastating collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge and to remember the 6 dedicated roadway workers who lost their lives. I think about these men and all of our roadway workers who maintain Maryland's transportation system. They show up and work in dangerous conditions. Our roadway workers deserve our utmost respect as they take risks and make sacrifices every single day to make our journey a little smoother. 1 year ago, many of us woke up to a phone call and the disbelief that the gateway to Baltimore was gone. It was clear from the wreckage blocking the shipping channel to the Port of Baltimore that the cleanup would take time and immense coordination. Lives and livelihoods would also be impacted. Looking back on those first 72 hours, so much was happening all at once. But thankfully, Maryland was extremely fortunate to have a leader with the experience to steer us through the crisis, with the strength, the confidence, and clear direction. Governor Moore kept us focused on the mission at hand while also thinking of the people who were impacted. We're also fortunate to have such a strong partnership with our federal, state, and local leaders who worked in lockstep to ease the fears and provide best response. Through this incredible partnership across the public and private sectors, we helped bring closure to the families, supported impacted workers and businesses, and reopened the shipping channel. And now work is well underway on the governor's 4th directive to rebuild the bridge. Governor Moore unveiled the new design last month, and pre-construction activities are underway. Demolition of the remaining bridge structure will happen later this year, followed by the start of the construction of the new bridge. Let me close by expressing my immense pride in the employees of the Maryland Department of Transportation. From the quick and heroic actions of the Maryland Transportation Authority police and dispatchers who stopped traffic on the bridge and saved lives. The MDTA's Executive Director, Bruce Gartner, and Chief Engineer, Jim Harkness, who continue to work tirelessly behind the scenes to build the new Key Bridge. And I also want to thank the Port of Baltimore's Executive Director, Jonathan Daniels, and our partner, Ports America Chesapeake, who helped keep the port open for business and workers on the job. Across the entire department, MDOT remains dedicated to delivering and maintaining a safe, efficient, and reliable transportation system for all. Thank you again for joining us this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Wes Moore.
I want to thank everyone for being here. From the families, to our elected officials, to our first responders, to our military personnel, to our labor leaders, to our esteemed guests, including the Mexican ambassador. Y Padre Dios, gracias por hoy y por esta mañana. Juntos estamos en Commemoration. This morning, we gather back to where we started, in the same place, at the same time. And even though the scene looks different, our memories are engraved. We remember the cold morning in March that changed our state forever. And we remember the tears that we shed and the uncertainty that we all felt. We remember looking out and seeing a deeply painful and unfamiliar sight, that a fixture of the Baltimore skyline and of Baltimore spirit, that parts of it were now laying on top of a ship, the length of 3 football fields. We remember the heartbreak that we felt to learn that 6 remarkable Marylanders who had been working while we slept, 6 patriots who endured the rattling of cars and trucks so the rest of us could be safe, that they were now unaccounted for. What happened on March 26, 2024 is and will always be a tragedy beyond words. And to the families of the victims that are with us today, there is little that I can say to truly be the balm for the pain that you feel. But I hope that you know that the prayers that we shared that morning, they were sincere. And I hope that you know that the promises that we made, we intend to keep. But the 6 victims of the Key Bridge collapse, they should be here right now. Menor Yasir Suazo Sandoval should be here. Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez should be here. Jose Minor Lopez should be here. Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes should be here. Dorleon Ronial Castillo Cabrera should be here. Carlos Daniel Hernandez should be here. We continue to pray for them and their loved ones. No pasa un día sin que estemos pensando en todos ustedes. Los vemos, estamos con todos ustedes y cuentan con todo nuestro apoyo, ahora y siempre. But we don't just look back on March 26th and remember the horror, we also remember the heroism. Because in the face of one of the worst tragedies in our state's history, Marylanders did what we always do. Marylanders stepped up. Our first responders, who didn't ask who was on the bridge before they dove into the water. Our firefighters, who didn't demand specifics before they rushed to the scene. Our officers who didn't ask for instructions before they put their bodies in the way of traffic to keep drivers from meeting a fatal journey in the black of night. Our service members, our Coast Guard, our Army Corps of Engineers, Navy SUPSOLV, who didn't ask who was in trouble before they kissed their loved ones goodbye and traveled to Baltimore to do their duty. The private sector rallied. The General Assembly rallied. Leaders at local and state and federal levels rallied. Our unified command rallied. We laid out 4 objectives that morning. And together, and with God's grace, we brought closure to the families, supported our people, and cleared the channel in 11 weeks when people said it would take 11 months. There were no guarantees that we would succeed. But that was not going to stop us in getting the work done. The steel was so mangled that one small misstep could set us back weeks or months. The debris was so sharp and so difficult to navigate that every single rescue operation that took place ran the risk of incurring another casualty. The devastation was so vast that we didn't know whether we could ever reunite the families with the ones that they lost. The economic impacts were so wide-ranging that Marylanders might have not just seen their jobs disappear, but they might have seen their jobs never return. And one of the most important ports in this entire country had the risk of losing partners permanently. But we did not let the what-ifs stop us from doing our work and from staying the course. We led with humanity. We set big goals, and we put together a plan to achieve them. And we stayed united, always, and led from the front. I believe that is what it means to be Maryland tough and Baltimore strong. To look danger and uncertainty in the face and know that we will never flinch. To answer a moment of crisis with genuine courage, to help each other when one of us gets knocked down. It's who we are. It's who we'll always be. And I know that soon, after accomplishing the first 3 objectives, we will accomplish the 4th, which is Marylanders of this generation and the next will look up and once again see the Francis Scott Key Bridge standing tall, and you have my word on that. May God continue to watch over our victims and their families and our team and this great state. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senate President Bill Ferguson.
Good morning. Mr. Governor, I have to admit I am more emotional than I expected this morning. Pulling up today and seeing this span immediately took me back to that moment in a way that I cannot even fathom the families of the victims of this horrible tragedy are feeling. Your loss is truly unimaginable, and I just want to say thank you for being here to remember your loved ones in a way that is impossible to describe, and I can only imagine how this past year has been. And I do want you to know, from the perspective of the General Assembly and the Senate of Maryland, we are truly here for you through this year and through the months and years ahead. This tragedy is overwhelming, and we sympathize with you every day. I remember a year ago standing on just the banks and seeing this horrific tragedy and immediately thinking of those who had been affected. and thinking, how do we move forward from this? How do we not get stuck in a moment of paralysis? And I think of a saying that former President Barack Obama said, that when things seem the most hopeless, the next thing you have to do is just act. You just have to do one next thing. Find hope with one next action. And you know what I realized was that it was already happening. By 6:30 in the morning, our first responders were already in the water. Our firefighters had units from across the entire region out ready to continue the rebuild and recovery. We had the Coast Guard, the Corps of Engineers, across local government, state government, federal government. We had heroes stepping up within minutes. In the deepest of tragedies, we share a common bond of the horror of pain of human suffering. But there's also the other side. The other side is the common belief in love and a hopeful future. And when I sit here today in front of that span and I look out into the audience of these incredible leaders and first responders, I hearken.
This hearing of the Subcommittee on Delivering on Government Efficiency will come to order. Welcome, everyone. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good morning. At the DOGE Subcommittee, we are continuing our war on waste. That means rooting out spending that is unnecessary, wasteful, and frankly, un-American. Today, we are looking at the more than $500 million federal taxpayers spend annually to fund public radio and television. A big chunk of this subsidy flows to National Public Radio and Public Broadcasting Service. NPR and PBS are the big DC-based entities that create and distribute much of the news and educational content heard and seen on public radio and TV stations across the country. When Congress adopted the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, it did so because it thought at the time that federal dollars were needed to provide objective news and education content to the entire nation, including rural residents who lived off the grid. Fast forward a few decades, and a lot has changed. The invention of the internet, for instance, and social media. It's made news and information widely available to those living in remote areas. Americans are increasingly consuming digital media and podcasts. The audience of public radio and television is declining. And I know this because I represent a rural district where farmers listen to podcasts and internet-based news while they drive their tractors. At the same time, NPR and PBS have increasingly become radical left-wing echo chambers for a narrow audience of mostly wealthy, white, urban liberals and progressives who generally look down on and judge rural America. PBS News is not just left-leaning, but it is actively uses taxpayer funds to push some of the most radical left positions, like featuring a drag queen on the show Let's Learn, a show targeted toward young children ages 3 to 8 years old. I want you to know I grew up watching children's programming on PBS. And as a mother who raised 3 children, I felt confident that I could leave the room while my own children were watching children's programming on PBS. But I can tell you right now, Ms. Kruger, specifically, as a mother, if I had walked in my living room or one of my children's bedrooms and seen this child predator and this monster targeting my children, I would become unglued. And that is how most parents feel all over this country. This is not the only example of them sexualizing and grooming children. They've been doing it for over the last decade. In 2015, PBS produced Frontline, put out a documentary, Growing Up Trans, that takes viewers on an intimate and eye-opening journey inside the struggles and choices facing transgender kids and their families. This means that PBS is one of the founders of the trans child abuse industry, all while taking taxpayer money. Brainwashing and transing children is an issue so hated by parents across the country that it was a driving force in the landslide Republican and Trump victory in the 2024 election cycle and presidential race. The news that these entities produced is either resented or increasingly tuned out and turned off by most of the hardworking Americans who are forced to pay for it. They no longer view NPR and PBS as trusted news sources. As a matter of fact, with these people, they're a threat. In fact, when Elon Musk put his hand over his heart and extended it and told the American people his heart goes out to them, PBS News posted the clip, called it a fascist Nazi salute, and described how it was similar to the same Heil used by Nazis at their victory rallies. Not once did PBS or NPR report on the numerous accounts of Democrats making the same gesture. AOC, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, somebody that lost a presidential race, Hillary Clinton, Governor Tim Walz. Why wasn't this treated exactly the same way? Is there not a standard in journalism today? Apparently not. Here's How We Lost America's Trust was in fact the title of a powerful essay written last year by Yuri Berliner, a veteran NPR editor. In his essay, Berliner described how NPR's downward spiral accelerated greatly during the first Trump administration. He said NPR dedicated efforts to damage the Trump presidency via relentless pursuit of Russiagate rumors that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia over the election. NPR hosts interviewed Adam Schiff, then the top Democrat of the House Intelligence Committee, 25 times about Trump and Russia. But they made no apologies when the Mueller report found no evidence that the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia, because they did not. Berliner also described NPR's passionate embrace of the left-wing DEI ideology that Americans clearly reject, as evidenced by the November elections. NPR's language and style guides were shaped by race and gender-based affinity groups that dominated the internal culture of the organization. And NPR journalists were to ask everyone they interviewed their race, gender, and ethnicity, and enter it into a centralized tracking system. This tracking system embeds DEI into the fibers of its content. Sounds like racism to me. It's a software attached to NPR's content management system where these reporters and producers submit information about their sources' race and ethnicity, gender identity, geographic location, that's kind of scary, and age range. The tool allows NPR to track the demographics of their sources in real time to allow for source diversity. The irony of these supposed diverse sources is that NPR has no real interest in diversity, like having diverse viewpoints. Berliner tried to sound the alarm on this when he checked voter registration records of the editors at DC's NPR headquarters and found 87 registered Democrats and 0 registered Republicans. But NPR treated Berliner like a political dissident in the old Soviet Union. He was driven out of the organization and forced to resign. Sounds like communism. And the ringleader of that effort was NPR's then newly appointed CEO, Catherine Maher, who is before us today. She dismissed Mr. Berliner's wake-up call as profoundly disrespectful, hurtful, and demeaning. In other words, instead of viewing it as a chance to finally right the ship at NPR, she doubled down. In doing so, she made it clear how any further internal dissent would be dealt with on her watch. That does sound like communist China at the taxpayer's expense. And no one should be surprised. NPR installed her in the top job after Ms. Maher was firmly on record with a litany of public comments and social media posts displaying her ultra-progressive views, her scorn for free speech, and her fondness for censorship. So now it's up to Congress to determine if Americans are going to continue to provide her and the organization that put her in charge willingly, after they knew these things, with taxpayer funds to continue to pursue their progressive, or rather communist, agenda. For far too long, federal taxpayers have been forced to fund biased news. This needs to come to an end, and it needs to come to an end now. So I am glad Ms. Maher and Ms. Kerger accepted our invitation to show up today and be held accountable to the taxpayers. I look forward to them answering our questions in full public view and explaining to the American people why they think they deserve Americans' hard-earned taxpayer money. I request unanimous consent that Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio, Representative Ro Khanna from California, Representative Emily Randall from Washington be waived on to today's hearing for the purpose of asking questions. Without objection, so ordered. And with that, I yield to Ranking Member Lynch for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for your willingness to come forward and offer your advice and testimony to this committee. Madam Chair, for over 2 decades of service on this Oversight Committee, I've worked with members on both sides of the aisle to investigate issues of critical importance to the safety and security of the American people, including the conduct of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, terrorist attacks against the U.S. compound classified annex in Benghazi, and several major intelligence and security breaches under Democratic and Republican administrations. So I'm sad to see that this once proud committee, the principal investigative committee in the House of Representatives, has now stooped to the lowest levels of partisanship and political theater to hold a hearing to go after the likes of Elmo and Cookie Monster and Arthur the Aardvark, all for the unforgivable sin of teaching the alphabet to low-income families' children and providing accessible local news and programming. This hearing also comes at the direction of President Trump and Elon Musk, who have repeatedly called for the defunding of all public media and claimed that media organizations such as PBS and NPR are, and I quote, a liberal disinformation machine, close quote. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is engaged in an actual disinformation campaign to minimize the catastrophic national security breach that was revealed earlier this week. As reported by Atlantic Editor-in-Chief Jeffrey Goldberg, Mr. Goldberg was inadvertently added to a group chat on an unauthorized, non-secure, publicly available message app in which Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth disclosed, quote, operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons systems, and other actions the U.S. would be taking, and also attack sequencing. I want to remind my colleagues in Congress that federal law makes it a crime when a person, through gross negligence, removes information relating to national defense from its proper place of custody or delivered to anyone in violation of this trust, ought to be lost, stolen, or abstracted or destroyed. And what's more, if evidence shows that any of the parties who were in on that signal chat lied under oath in the Senate yesterday, Mr. Ratcliffe or Ms. Gabbard, for instance, then certainly conspiracy to conceal that breach would be far worse, where center or criminal intent is in evidence, and would be more likely to invite culpability and possible criminal liability. The Secretary of Defense would be subject to criminal prosecution, and it would be the responsibility of the U.S. Attorney General to prosecute that, but where a conflict exists, it might require a special prosecutor. This security breach severely compromised the safety of American troops in advance of imminent U.S. operations and airstrikes against Houthi rebel positions. It is well documented that the Houthi arsenal includes anti-aircraft capability, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, rockets, and unmanned aerial attack drones. Mr. Goldberg, who was unwittingly elevated to the clearance level afforded to members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was also joined in the exposed group chat by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and other senior members of President Trump's national security team. This committee should be questioning every single one of them as to why they were using an unapproved, unsecure messaging app to conduct sensitive, classified discussions about military operations in which our sons and daughters in uniform are being sent into battle. One of the participants was actually sitting in Russia, using an unsecure app. And every member of this committee knows what that means. We've all been advised about which apps are secure and insecure and when it is appropriate to engage in non-critical discussions. As former chairman of our subcommittee on national security, I recall a time when just the potential for a security breach that could expose American troops and intelligence personnel to unnecessary danger would immediately trigger hearings and bring this committee to a lather on both sides. But you can bet we won't be touching this issue. Because today, the controlling House majority is afraid to do its job. It is afraid to hold Trump and Trump's administration accountable. They would rather post up against Big Bird than deal with that issue. In reference to public media, Elon Musk recently asked, should your tax dollars really be paying for an organization run by people who think the truth is a distraction? Well, I would say about the same about the current administration and its proliferation of disinformation, from claims that Ukraine started its own invasion, to Secretary Heged's assertion that no one was texting war plans. You can read the text today because yesterday in the hearing they said it wasn't classified information. So you can actually go on the New York Times website and read the text that was discussed in advance of our military operations in Yemen. Madam Chair, if shame was still a thing, this hearing would be shameful. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I am pleased to introduce our witnesses today. Paula Kerger is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Public Broadcasting Service, also known as PBS. Catherine Marr is the President and Chief Executive Officer of National Public Radio, also known as NPR. Mike Gonzalez is the Angelus T. Arredondo E Pluribus Unum Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Ed Ullman is the President and CEO of Alaska Public Media. Again, I want to thank you all for being here to testify today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth,